What is one memory that never fails to make you smile every time you think about it? My mom found out she had stage 4 lung cancer when I was 2 and passed away when I was 6. When she got diagnosed, she was given 6 months to live, so needless to say, she gave us lots of amazing memories and really lived in the moment. The one story I always tell when talking about my mom was how one day she let me and my older sister stay home, which was a big deal in 1st and 3rd grade already. We went to Bulk Barn and got every item we wanted. When we got home, we snuggled in my parents' bed, spread out what felt like a never-ending amount of bags of chocolate candy, and watched Disney movies all afternoon. When my dad came home from work, he just jumped right in and joined us. It was right before she went into hospice and the last good day I remember her having before she passed, so the memory holds a special place in my heart. About a year ago, was in a discount grocery store. I had about $20 left after bills and rent, so was having to carefully pick what to buy. In the end, after umming and ahhing for a couple of minutes over whether I could afford to spend $6 on coffee, I put it back on the shelf and went to the register. As I'm walking out of the shop, I hear a woman call after me, "Young man, you forgot this." I turn around and she thrusts the jar of coffee into my bag. I go to protest and she cuts me off saying, "I remember what it was like. Not having enough money and having to go without. You take that coffee and enjoy it, mate." The biggest smile on her face. She was like a beacon of light during one of my darkest times. And I always remember her. With every cup of coffee I can't help but smile. Because now each cup reminds me there are truly good people in the world. Edit. Never thought much of Reddit karma, but am surprised and very appreciative to have gotten 8K upvotes in gold for this story. But more so for seeing how people have responded. I am glad my story has cheered and helped so many of you. I dedicate this, by far my highest voted post, to Margaret. If by some chance you're reading this, thank you again for the coffee. And I hope you are well. I've paid forward your kind deed several times since then, and hope in some way it has circled back to you. I sometimes wonder if you know just how much impact you made on me and my outlook on life that day. Also, fixed spelling. Always remember there are good and kind people out there. Don't let a few bad apples ruin humanity for you. For years I did. And I've only recently learnt this lesson. If you take anything away from this post, let it be that. Bike tours with Grandpa. He sure was the son. My daughter was born in July. The following fall she often would cry at night. I would wrap her in a blanket and take her for a walk. Moments after we got into the cool fall air, she would fall asleep, but I would make the walk last as long as I could. Now every fall when the first cool evening hits I smile and often take a walk. Edit. She's now 38. My favorite childhood memory is, and always will be, sitting at the kitchen table having a coffee with my mom. We would just sit and talk for hours about everything over a pot of coffee. Truthfully, every time I have a coffee I think of those times and smile. That probably contributes to my caffeine addiction. I need a coffee to get through my day has totally different meaning for me. That joyful thought always rights whatever wrong is going on. She lives several states away now and is getting older. I don't know how many coffee talks we have left, but I'll always have the ones we've already had. Any memory with my grandpa? Well, he technically isn't my real grandpa, but he's who I grew up with my whole life. The man was hardworking, loving, funny, and every positive aspect you'd ever want in a grandpa. But there's one memory that stands out. 6 years ago, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, colon cancer, and Alzheimer's. They weren't diagnosed together, but he took those diseases to the grave. It was too much for him to be awake during all of it. So they medically induced a coma that he never woke up from. Throughout all of it, he never moved a muscle. The quiet sounds of his breathing were all we heard. At one point, my sister was by his side in tears. Like the rest of us. Out of nowhere, he reached up with his arm and gave my sister a hug. No one else got any actions from him. Not even my grandma. It's a memory none of us will forget. Especially not my sister. He died on March 4, 2014. And our family gets together for ice cream on that date, along with his birthday, to celebrate his life. He didn't deserve the pain he went through one bit. But I have no doubt that his loved ones greeted him with a smile when it was all over. I love you. Grandpa edit. Wow. Almost 1,000 upvotes. Thanks for all the support. I wasn't even expecting it. Thinking about my cat, Cricket, and how he loved hanging out with me in my garage. Like he was my assistant working on the car or sat with me during rainstorms. He was so much fun. I got to spend an entire week staying with my grandmother once when I was a child. That week was the best since I love my grandmother. We would scrapbook, sew, bake cookies, and do puzzles together. I was so happy to be able to spend time with her like that. She was my favorite person in the world. I loved my grandmother so much that when I was a little kid, what I wanted to be when I grew up was a grandmother. She's no longer alive. So I'm relearning how to sew during the quarantine and am going to make a quilt with some of her old quilt blocks. I did arts and crafts, storytime, etc. as a volunteer at the children's hospital. Definitely when my favorite kid found a bone marrow donor. They have a large golden bell at the front of the ward that kids ring when they finish chemotherapy. She hadn't finished yet, but she just went up to the bell and karate chopped it. The first time my daughter spoke an intelligible word. She woke up in the morning and looking at me said Papa. The funny part is that my wife had, according to her, the perfect plan. She would say, repeatedly, to the baby, the word Papa. Then, supposedly, when the baby would need anything she would call me and not my wife. It worked until certain point. Now she's jealous that the first word was Papa. But, when the baby wants something she calls for her mommy. Most of the times. My mom would sing and dance in the kitchen every Sunday morning when I was growing up. Times were always tough and money was always tight, but my mom always made sure we were happy and healthy. One particular day when I was 8. I was woken up by the sound of Gloria Gaynor's "I Will Survive" blasting through the house and my mom singing off-key. As I walked to the kitchen, the smell of chorizo and eggs filled the air and there I saw her. My mom, who only a few days earlier looked so miserable with her life, was dancing her heart out with a spatula in hand. When she passed away 7 years later, I cried every time I thought of her. Except for this memory. This is the only memory that got me through her death. It not only makes me smile every time I think of it, but it's my favorite memory of all time because I'm so lucky to remember her for who she was. Edit. I was given the Gold Award. Thank you so much, kind stranger. It's my first. And wow, this is getting a lot of upvotes too. Thank you all. The last afternoon I spent with my grandma. She was such a firecracker. Always joking around and giving people the bird. We had a great time. Just the two of us. She passed away in September 2019. About 2 months after her husband. I miss them both, but thinking about that last afternoon with her always makes me smile. One time my brother said something funny while I was eating cereal and I had a huge mouthful of unchewed mini wheats and milk and I started to laugh, but then my sister said something funnier and then I thought of the most epic funny thing to say, but I was trapped in the state of laughter, trying not to spit out or choke on my food. Which actually made me laugh even harder because of the situation I was in. Then my brother looks at me like WTF is wrong with you, and I just point at him and then my sister and then myself, and it was so stupid and I just fell to the floor crying with laughter. My first time coming home from college. I was worried my dog would forget me while I was gone. But when I walked through the door, she lost her. I've never felt so loved. And relieved. I've told this story on here before, but I used to work for a landscaping company cutting grass in industrial parks. One day I was cutting a huge piece of lawn after a light rain. And stirred up a bunch of bugs. Some swallows must have noticed and went on a sort of feeding frenzy all around me for like 1/2 hour. I would be riding along and a bird would swoop what felt like inches from my head. And then spiral all around to catch more bugs. After watching them for a minute or so, I knew they wouldn't crash into me. So it was like being given a private air show. My dad was retired military. When I was pregnant with my son, he came to stay at my house near my due date. Things start happening and off we go to the hospital. My husband driving me in his car. And my brother and dad following in their car. I had a truly horrible and very long contraction right before we got to the hospital. So my husband calls my dad to tell him the new plan. He was going to grab a wheelchair for me and then my dad was going to take me in to get admitted while the other two parked the cars. So we get out of the cars. And I'm sobbing, leaning on my dad while waiting for the wheelchair. He asks me if I'm okay. I think just as a reflex. Obviously I say no. I can barely focus through the pain and this is not a light, delicate tear slowly rolling down my check situation. So the wheelchair comes and I get in it. My dad starts pushing and hauls through the doors. Where I see there is a line of people waiting to check in at the front desk. Dad doesn't even attempt to wait in line. He goes directly to the side of the desk as fast as he can push my fully pregnant self. He doesn't look like he's planning on stopping for the little old lady who's being helped. So I put my feet out to stop the wheelchair and prevent her from being hit. Luckily she doesn't take very long and my dad soon pushes me up a little further to talk to the woman behind the desk. Hi, yeah. My daughter is in labor. She needs to be checked in right away. Okay, sir. We can do that. We just need some ID from you now at this point. He's behind me so I can't see him. But the contraction is finally starting to subside so I'm calming down a little bit. But I can hear the disgust dripping from his voice when he says, she's about to have a baby and you're worried about my ID? She tells him yes. She doesn't need anything from me but she does need to make a quick ID sticker for him. So logically the next thing he says is, okay fine. Here's my driver's license. Military ID. Credit cards, what else do you need? Can we go now? While emptying his entire wallet and tossing random cards on the desk. My dad was a career military man and I have rarely seen him lose his cool. But the memory of him losing his and trying to help while I was in pain always makes me smile. He died recently and I really miss him.